I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando, where we truly go beyond the veneer. You'll experience the raw and the real of leadership. You'll see your feet not miles away from the top. Today we're talking to Tim Hawks. I usually follow the guest name with CEO of company X, Y, or Z or something similar, but before I tell you his role, I want you to put yourself in his shoes. He's the head of his organization. He has to inspire over 7,000 people around a common mission, vision, and goal, but he pays less than 1% of them. Many people struggle to find the right title for Tim, but as he puts it,
most of the people just call me Pastor Tim.
Wait a minute. Before you hit stop on this podcast, I want to encourage you to learn from this great leader. We don't have a political or secret religious agenda in bringing Tim on this podcast. You're not going to hear a sermon, but what you will hear is a unique perspective as a leader. He has to accomplish a lot, and he doesn't pay a large number of people to get that work done inside of his organization. Can you imagine how hard this is, Chip?
Yeah, what's interesting listening to Tim is that he has a lot of the same issues that leaders of for-profit companies have. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's a really good call out, and I think it's something that, as people are listening to this, should really sensitize their ears to listening. Today, we're going to talk about how he inspires thousands of people. It's all about aligning people around a common vision and showing them how they can make a difference, how they can have an impact. We talk about how more communication actually can lead to more confusion, how to use the skills of the people on your team, what to do when people make a mistake as a leader, and a lot more. Listen in as Tim tells a little bit more about his organization.
So Hill Country Bible Church was planted about 30 years ago, and I became the lead pastor 2.5 years in to the church plant. We started in a school, then moved to a rented space in a shopping center. Now we have our own facilities. We're on 53 acres of land. We've got about $30 million worth of facilities. We have 2 additional campuses we've purchased land for, and we're getting ready to plant a 4th campus. So have about 100 employees. People are coming and going, so that's about the number we have. We have about 7,000 in attendance on Sunday morning across all of our campuses. We have a school, private school that meets here that's part of our church, and we have about 100 staff that are also part of the school staff as well. So that's a little bit of background on who we are.
Well, people that are listening may be saying, well, gosh, a pastor, that's interesting, but, how does that correlate or kind of track back to leadership? And so in your mind, what do you see are the differences in leading a not-for-profit versus leading a for-profit company?
That is a great question. Jim Collins at one point said that leading nonprofit is one of the more difficult leadership challenges because you're actually working with an army of volunteers, and volunteers are motivated in very different ways than, say, an average employee, even though I personally believe that there are lots of overlaps between the two. But we're really working with a staff of about 100 on a day-to-day basis, and their responsibility is to lead, encourage, strengthen, spiritually challenge, and involve the other 7,000 people that are part of our church. So in many ways, our leadership calling is to cast the kind of vision and inspire the kind of mission that people who work 50-hour weeks, have families, are living their lives would want to invest in and give themselves to. And that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah, no, that's, you said there's some overlap. I mean, I guess people could really look at the differences, but I agree with you. I think there's more similarities. What are some of the similarities you see in leading, regardless if it's for-profit or not-for-profit?
I think at the heart of every individual, there is a sense of destiny, that people want to log time and live their life in a way that's going to actually make a difference. That's part of my belief that comes right out of my faith, that God himself has created the universe with a purpose, and that God has put in the hearts of people this idea of purpose and value. So I think whether you're leading a company that's making widgets or a public service company or a governmental institution or a nonprofit, even a church, that one of the keys to inspiring people and involving them is going to be, do you have a vision that people really believe that they're making a difference? I think the second component is that everybody has strengths and weaknesses. They have gifting. We believe that that's inspired by God and placed within the heart of every unique individual. And part of leading is to be able to help people discover what those strengths and skills are, what their unique set of values to an organization can be, and then to find meaningful ways to mobilize those kinds of giftings and strengths. And I really think across for-profits and nonprofits, if people can do that, if leaders can do that, give people a sense of purpose and then utilize their uniqueness, you've got a powerful combination to accomplish great things.
That is very true. You and I have talked about, people are going to connect to something because of, like you said, that need to want to make a difference, that internal need and drive. And so, sometimes people connect to their paycheck because it's a sense of security. Sometimes they, connect to just the job or the people that are around them or even to their title because of the status that it brings them. But if you can get people to connect to the vision, and you as a leader, now you can really start changing things. And that's really at the heart of, what the title of this podcast is, for you. People that are for others and their leadership really do start to create a true movement.
I totally agree, Kurt. And the challenge of the paycheck, because we have a number of employees, the challenge of the paycheck is always a challenge of value. Some people see the paycheck as a means to be able to not only support themselves, but also to enjoy their lifestyle. But our experience here has been that an increase in pay is less viewed as an opportunity to live a better life and more of an opportunity to find out, am I really doing well? Am I really accomplishing what I need to be doing? And so I think there's a deep feeling within every person that they need to know that they're making a difference.
Well, one of the things that in business happens oftentimes is it gets more complex, and as we grow, there's just more opportunities to do more things. And what I see oftentimes is we just start hiring more people. And in an environment where you guys are, where there are, essentially 7,000 plus volunteers and 100 people that are trying to, get them into the work that is going to make that difference for them. I mean, how do you guys handle those challenges of just saying, wow, it's so complex, why don't we just hire more people, versus saying, listen, why don't we go and activate more volunteers?
That is a really big challenge. And it's also always a challenge for us in the sense that if a person is on our team and they're earning a paycheck for their service and their ministry, it's hard for them at times to challenge other people because it feels a little bit like I'm asking you to do something for free that I'm getting paid to do. And so part of what we have to do is help our team overcome that sense and recognize that what folks are doing when they volunteer their time is for a greater cause, and people actually feel better if they're serving because out of their love for God and their love for their fellow man than if they're simply doing it to get some kind of a temporal reward. So leading our team to get their mind and heart into the volunteers and the people that are part of our church and not lose sight of that is one of our biggest leadership challenges that we struggle with. And frankly, sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't.
You talk about communication, and we've talked about this, is, I'd say 99% of the companies that I work with, one of the issues that always gets raised is we just have poor communications. And I think that's code for either we're not clear on what it is we're trying to accomplish, or we're not being transparent about what we're talking about. But inevitably, it always ends up people interpret it as we need more communication. We need newsletters, whatever it is. And so they interpret it as communication not being good, as we need more. Kind of talk a little bit about kind of your journey as a leader and how you have seen, how you communicate from, a small organization when, 28 years ago when you got started to, a large organization now, and how that's evolved.
That's an excellent question, and I just have to be honest. Not just because you're my friend we're doing your podcast here, but because you've taught me so much about this over the years and really challenged me to understand what effective communication is. Our experience has been that more communication creates confusion. It's not creating more noise in the system. I mean, let's face it. How many of you all out there want to get another newsletter? Or you want to read another piece, or you want to, I mean, most of us feel overwhelmed with the amount of information and communication that's coming our way. So the challenge has been to have the kind of honest, effective, real communication that makes a difference and where people walk away with clarity. When the church was really small, I did all the communication. And so it was easy for me to kind of use my intuitive leadership skills to gauge whether a person got it, whether we were in agreement, whether we were on the same page and moving forward. And so for a lot of years, I just kind of took for granted that communication was effective and working. As the church got bigger and more complex and I had to communicate through people, it was harder for me to understand that we could sit in a meeting and talk and have different people with different definitions of what we actually just said. They go out and talk to their team. They share a different definition. Those people go talk to the next group with a different definition. And before long, we've got confusion all down the lines, even though we gave the same memo, said the same words, used the same PowerPoint presentation. So one of the big challenges for me has been to recognize that we need to invest the time at each leadership level to sit down and have long discussions about what our goals are, what we mean by those goals, what our culture is supposed to be, what does that look like, and work at that at each level until we're assured that we are aligned, that when we say something, we mean the same thing. And then after we've done the initial work, we've got to say it over and over and over and over again.
Will you repeat that one more time?
Yes,
that last
exactly. And over and over and over and over again. Exactly. So, and part of the challenge for me is I tend to be on the visionary side and less on the management side. So I want to say something to my executive staff and just go on and conquer the next mountain and start pointing us in the direction of the next thing that we want to see God do in our city or in our nation. And to realize that I have to be painstakingly cautious about ensuring that we at the executive level are completely united. And that's been a hard lesson to learn, but I think after all these years, I'm starting to learn it.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. It's interesting. It's very nuanced because what you said is, when it was smaller, it was easier because you had that kind of hand-to-hand conversation where you can actually read the situation. And as you've grown, just the intensity of and I say this to people, leaders, one of their main responsibilities is to get the drama out of the business and make sure that we've got good signal strength from the leadership who typically knows clearly what we want to do. But then that signal strength fades. And part of the getting the drama out is just like you said, being clear, stating it over and over and over and having the discipline to do that. But I can't tell you how many leaders, especially that are further in their career, that will say to me, Kirk, people said they got it and they wanted me to quit talking about it. So I quit talking about it. And sure enough, it faded. And they said that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I made is I just didn't keep stating and restating the goals. Now you got to be creative about that. But I really appreciate you sharing that because I think a lot of people listening in this can feel like, I'm just a broken record. And as a leader, that's part of your role.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And the downside of taking your foot off the gas when it comes to your communication and just going into coast mode is when you've lost your DNA. When you spent years establishing it and you built an organization or a ministry on that DNA, and then you wake up one day and you realize that it's gone. It's not really present in your staff and leaders. And you realize the consequences of that kind of slip and what it takes to get it back. I mean, for those of you who haven't been down that path, take it from me, it's worth keeping that in focus always. And for those of you who've been down that path and you've had to fight the battle to get back to what your real values are, I'm sure you're smiling right now because you know it's better to stay on task, to stay on message, than it is to lose the message and have to rekindle it.
Yeah, and maybe you've experienced some of this. I know people that are listening will relate with this. Is as we grow, we feel like there's a greater need to really define the how, kind of get into the tactics, and if we somehow can do that very well, then we will keep the course. When all actuality, we've hired and retained people that are talented enough to figure out the how, but it's why. And as long as we can keep on continuing to state and restate kind of where we're going, like you said, the vision and kind of the reasons behind that, people will get where they need to be. We've talked about this. People can operate without certainty. Obviously, we would all like absolute certainty in everything, but they really struggle without clarity. So they can operate without certainty, but they cannot operate without clarity.
Well, that has certainly been our experience. And the joy when everybody is accomplishing the same goals and moving in the same direction, compared to the frustration when people have invested a significant amount of time and then find out that they just really aren't in step with everybody else. It's just so much better to operate together than it is to have to break down those silos at some point in the future.
Very true. So if you had to write a sermon title about leadership, what would it be about?
Well, that's one of those interesting things that we actually take right out of the pages of our faith. So when you think about Christianity, and I don't know how many of you listening to the podcast have a background in Christianity, but one of the uniquenesses of Christianity is that God invested his leadership by showing up. So God's son Jesus shows up and he walks among us, lived 33 years on the earth. We've got all overwhelming historical records to point that out. And what Jesus said is, if you want to be my disciple, then do what I do. Follow me. And so the message of Christianity was that you can actually experience the transformation and the life of God, but the way you do that is to follow. You follow a real living incarnate example of how to live, how to think, how to move. And so in leadership, we see the same thing. It's not a matter of we've got this great vision and we've got this great task that we want to send you on. It's this idea that we're going someplace personally because it's what we believe and what we embrace and what we're committed to, and we want to invite you to follow us. So as the Apostle Paul once said, follow my example as I follow the example of Jesus. So it's interesting when I teach classes on leadership or preach a sermon on it, I just use the old Peter Pan song to get the message across. I mean, the old Peter Pan song is, we're following the leader, the leader, the leader, we're following the leader wherever he may go. And that idea is, I'm going someplace and I'm inviting you to come along is kind of the essence of leadership. So what I want to do as a pastor is I want to walk with God in such a way that my life is being transformed, that sets an example to invite other people to join me on that journey. And then as we journey together, we want to help people along the way to experience the same blessings that we have. So leadership is really incarnational, it's servant-oriented, it's visionary, and it's just taking people on the journey that you're going on yourself.
That's really good. That's whether your faith, whether you believe Jesus is who he says he is, and the miracles that he created, regardless of that, if you really look into the pages of the Bible and really look at that for the essence of leadership, and like how you said that, I think there's so many people. We spend $14 billion a year in the United States on leadership development, yet a study done by McKinsey says that over 35% of people would forego a substantial raise to see their leader fired.
That's rough.
That is rough. And what it says is that people are hurting. People are willing to walk away from an improvement in their life, from being able to create personal wealth and financial freedom and security, to just see the person that's leading them removed. And I think that, your simple but powerful explanation of just being somebody that's, going somewhere and it's worth following, that has that integrity and follows that path, is so powerful, yet it's lost in so many different leadership development and trainings and books and everything else like that.
Well, and one of the things that I think people struggle with is when you start talking about that kind of incarnational leadership, where what you believe for your group or your organization or the vision has to be who you are. We all recognize that we're very imperfect. And so oftentimes people don't pursue this path because they feel like, well, I could never live up to the ideals that I'm trying to get everybody to live up to. So one of the real incredible things about our faith is the concept of forgiveness and the willingness to confess where we've fallen short and to be honest with people and to ask their forgiveness and invite them back into the journey with you. And so that's a constant thing that we encourage. I do it myself, and we encourage our leaders, is when we fall short of the ideals that we've set for our team and for ourselves, that we're willing to say, hey, I blew it and I'm really sorry. I ask you to forgive me. And in doing that, we give people the freedom to fail and try again. And that's part of what Christianity teaches. That's what Jesus taught, that we all are going to mess up. And God in Jesus has given us the freedom to fail and to confess our sins and rely on Him and receive forgiveness. So when that becomes part of what you've become as a leader, a willingness to be vulnerable, to try, to set ideals, to step out and try, and then when you fail, to be able to admit that and take responsibility for it, ask for forgiveness, that's when people really start to follow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about Gabe Kretschek. He's the CEO of Kasasa. We did a podcast with him, and they have a set of really strong values that they live by, but one of them is love.
It's good.
That's one of their values. And many times in meetings and stuff like that, and he says this podcast, he talks about, he's not perfect and he loses his temper like anyone else, but he'll stand up in the meeting and say, hey, I need to ask for everybody's forgiveness here because, I violated our value of love and how I treated or spoke to or whatever the case may be. And so, and I have, I've spent 20 years working with thousands of leaders, and I've been very, very fortunate to be at their right hand as they had really major breakthroughs and celebrations, but also major breakdowns. And I can tell you the consistent thread that runs through all of those, my own personal experiences, the people that are willing to be transparent and vulnerable and lead the way that you're sharing are the ones that actually end up with people that will follow them. Even if it's out of curiosity, they'll follow them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think everybody that's listening here would admit that they would rather follow somebody who knows that they do things that are wrong, that is willing to admit those rather than pretend like they've got it all together. And those are the people that we learn from, we listen to. Those are the people we love to follow. And so it's one thing to say it and want it for somebody else. It's another thing to live it out yourself. But when you do, the rewards are just immeasurable.
So what'd you learn from the podcast with Tim today? A couple things that I learned in having this conversation with Tim was, we focused on communication. Oftentimes we hear the word communication. Think about your own organization. Is communication an issue inside your organization? It's not commonly understood or thought about, but it's really a red herring typically for something else that's going on. And oftentimes when people say communication's a problem, what the people hearing that think is, well, we need more communication. That's when you start to see more newsletters, start to see, messages stuffed in paychecks, start to see stuff showing up if you have a TV system inside the organization. And really what it does is it actually creates more confusion. What people are typically saying to decode it when they say that the communication is a problem is either people aren't telling the truth, that it's not being transparent. More times than not, it's just we're just not focused. We keep introducing new thoughts and new ideas and framing things in different ways, and we're just creating that confusion. We just need to be clearer. The other thing I really appreciated Tim saying, and I thought, I love the simplicity, but the powerful message that it sends is a lot of leadership is just showing up. There's been studies that have shown that if you just fall out of bed and just fumble through life, you're going to influence and impact over 10,000 people in your lifetime. That's without even trying. So if you can be just intentional in thinking about how you're showing up as a leader, the influence that you have, whether it's inside your organization, inside your team, maybe it's at home, maybe it's in a church community that you're involved with, or maybe it's a little league team where those young children are looking to you as a leader. Either way, a lot of leadership is just showing up. So, what'd you think of today's podcast? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Either way, I sure would appreciate hearing from you. If you would please go to foryouleaders.com, once again, foryouleaders.com, and leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought. Also, if there's other leaders that you think we should be talking to, or there's different subjects that you want us to focus on, let us know, and we will do that for you. So until the next time we talk, thank you for listening.